أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوضوا أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لن تنالوا البر حتى تنفقوا مما تحبون صدق الله العلي العظيم. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, wherever you may be. First off, a very happy Mother's Day to all of those in the United States and in Europe and throughout the globe. I know it's not the case in Europe, for example, but it certainly is in the United States. And therefore, in Islam, the position of the mother is such that we commemorate and respect and revere mothers all day and at every moment in time. And so may Allah bless all of them, my mother included, and all of your mothers, inshallah. If they are here, may Allah bless them, may Allah grant them long lives. And at the same time, if they have departed from this world, may Allah grant them the highest status in Jannah, inshallah. Having said this, the question that I want to give you at the onset of our conversation is why me? Why do I have to deal with adversity? Why do I have to deal with difficulty? Keep this question at the forefront of your mind. When we look at our modern world and our modern society, especially the current times that we're going through, that is the time of COVID-19, the crisis of the coronavirus, it has led us to unprecedented times, times which we have never seen before in our lifetimes, times that are very new to us, times where we are in isolation, times where we are in lockdown, times where we are spending times indoors that we're not used to and we have not throughout times. And we've also had to suffer, many of us, economic hardships, that is loss of jobs, loss of wealth, loss of income, loss of business for many people. On top of that, sometimes living with all of these things in a close-knit environment in the house, with a husband, with a wife, with children, where there's on top of this lockdown and isolation, on top of this not the ability to go out, on top of this economic hardship, it leads to struggle and tussles within the household. And ultimately, when these struggles and tussles emerge, it creates an environment that can be very stressful, very difficult, very challenging for individuals. And ultimately, people come forward and begin to ask the very natural question that people have asked since the beginning of time. When a difficulty emerges, why me? Why am I suffering? Why do I have to suffer through this? Why is coronavirus affecting me? Why is it affecting my family? Why did I have to lose my job? Why did I have to lose my income? Why did I have to lose my sanity? Why did I have to lose my peace of mind? Why did I have to go through this? And this is a very natural question. And in fact, many a times in our world, depending on the worldview that you have, depending on the worldview that I have, do I see the world in the way that difficulties will be part and parcel of life? Or do I see the world in a way that difficulties should not be in life? There should be only roses in life. There should only be, for example, clear skies and sunshine in life. If I see the world that way and a challenge hits me, how do I perceive it? All of these come to this question that philosophers, theologians, people of faith, people who are not of faith, people who are Christians, people who are Jews, people who are Hindus, people who are Buddhists, people who are Muslims, people who are agnostic, people who are atheists, all have at some point in time reflected on this question, why me? Why did I have to go through this? And why did adversity have to hit me? Therefore, in the brief moments that we have together, I would like to look at this question and analyze it from a few different dimensions. I want to first look at, with respect to this question, what is the view of, for example, other religions and other faiths on this issue of why me and adversity and the problem and the challenges that one may face in their life. I want to then look at what some of the science says with respect to this challenge and how you and I can look at this and get some perspective from the science. I then want to look at the Islamic perspective on this matter and also highlight what were the lives of some of the prophets, what were the lives of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and also globally, how is this question of why me and dealing with adversity, how is it pertinent as at a global level? And is it possible that great people had to go through adversity? Great people had to go through difficulty before they were able to achieve their greatness, before they were able to achieve their magnitude in society, as they say. I want you to bear these main points in mind, inshallah, as we go through them, beginning at this very moment, inshallah. Firstly, with respect to the position of difficulty, of challenges, this is tied directly to my worldview. How do I see the world? Do I see the world in a way that everything is supposed to be roses, clear skies, sunshine, and there should be no difficulty in life? Or is it possible that it may be at times days are good, at times days are bad, and we'll have to take things in stride? Or is it that life is meant to be, for example, difficult is life meant to be, for example, painful? And in much of modern self-help literature, that is literature on self-development, on helping you overcome stress, anxiety, and the likes, people who are lay people, not experts, not necessarily people who are psychiatrists, people who are psychologists, not necessarily people who are therapists, they've tried to say that life will be beautiful, everything's wonderful. But one way of analyzing this and coming forward when you look at this is, if you believe that things are going to be always good and things are always beautiful and things are always going to be perfect, well, what happens when you get hit with difficulty? When you get hit with difficulty, you may think that life's supposed to be all perfect. And when you actually get hit with a job loss, when you get hit with a loved one leaving you or a loved one leaving this world, when you get hit with the loss of a child, may Allah protect everyone's children. If you get hit with something that's really difficult and your perception and your worldview was that life is going to be beautiful, and then you get hit with something difficult, what happens? It's as if you fall off a cliff. You begin to think, oh my goodness, my life is over. I wasn't expecting this. Whereas if you begin to say that, no, hold on a second, life will have challenges, life will have difficulties, life will have adversities, financial loss, loss of loved ones, health loss, all of these things may be part and parcel of my life. Well, then if I believe this and I understand that this can happen and may very well happen, and I expect it, well, then when I get hit with a difficulty, it may not be as if I'm falling off a cliff. It may be that, for example, I'm falling off, for example, maybe one story, or I'm falling off, for example, a shorter distance. It still hurts, but it doesn't hurt as much, for example. I say this because in philosophy, there's this view of the Stoics within philosophy. Before we come to the Islamic perspective, we must look at what other perspectives throughout history and society have said. When you look at, for example, the Stoics, the likes of Seneca, the likes of Marcus Aurelius, the likes of these individual philosophers who were there in the Greek and Roman times, their view shifted from others in the past. As Seneca, for example, said, who was one of the Stoic philosophers, he was going through a situation where he was being carted off, where he was being taken away in his final moments. And when he was being taken away to be killed, to be taken away, his family began to cry, his wife began to cry, his children began to cry, as is natural. And he said a very famous statement at that moment when he was being dragged off and taken away. And he looked at his wife and he looked at his children, he looked at his family, and he said, what good is it to cry over a part of life? What good is it to cry over a portion of life? This very moment that you're crying over, what good is it to cry over this very moment? For all of life requires and calls for tears. That is, all of life will have difficulties. All of life will have adversity. And so the same was, for example, true with other philosophers such as Marcus Aurelius and the likes. And you see their views becoming revived in history today, and it's becoming revived in our world today. Why? Because this methodology, this worldview of looking at the world and saying that things will always, for example, be good, when I think life will be that way and I'm not realistic about things, that doesn't mean don't be optimistic. We've already discussed the benefits of optimism in previous lectures. But what it means is I be realistic and I realize that challenges will occur. When I realize that, then the difficulties, the adversities, the job loss, the family loss, the health loss, these things, they hurt, but not as much because I'm expecting it. And so this was the revival. That's also why Buddhist philosophy has emerged and become very popular in Western or in industrial economies in the East and the West. Why has it become popular? Because people have come forward. Buddhism actually purports that life is suffering. Life will have suffering. Why? Because if you look at the life of someone like Buddha, whose teachings have now become very popular and very famous, well, he was born into a royal family, a family that had all societal prestige in what's now modern day India. His father had kept him in an ivory tower and had kept him protected from all the difficulties and all the adversity of life. He wanted to keep his son away from all the challenges of life, all the challenges of financial difficulty, of loss, of everything that you can think of. He wanted to protect him. And yet his son, at that moment in time, he feels lonely, he feels depressed, he feels isolated, yet despite all of the good intentions of his father. So he goes out on this journey of introspection, of reflection, of looking at life, of trying to understand life. And he realizes and he comes to his conclusion that life is suffering. That father who's trying to protect his child and give everything in terms of wealth and worldly position, his child still ends up suffering. And that it may very well be the case that that one who is not trying to be protected may not suffer, but still find some way of suffering. And so that was the conclusion of Buddhist philosophies. And these thoughts are all coming forward now in our modern world and emerging once again. What's the perspective? What's the view of Islam on this matter? What's the view of Islam with respect to challenges, adversities, difficulties in life? Islam is very clear and categorical that life will have difficulties, life will have challenges. We will have to give away at times from our wealth. We may have to lose some money, some wealth. We may at times have to, for example, go through sickness, go through illness, go through difficulty. We may at times, for example, lose someone we care about deeply, lose someone we love very deeply. We may have to go all of these things. And these are all trials, all tests that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us in our lives so that we can develop ourselves, so that we can raise ourselves in terms of our spiritual status, and so that we can get divine benefits and divine bounty in the hereafter and the world to come. But don't neglect the fact that challenges and difficulties can give you and I benefits in this world as well. If you look at any major thinker, any great person in history, you'll be hard pressed to find someone who has not gone through difficulty in life before achieving greatness in their lives. These are people who are presidents, prime ministers, world leaders, people who are scholars. Everyone, you will notice there is a pattern in life. And that pattern in life is when one goes through difficulty and goes through these dark times, you have the choice and the ability to learn lessons from those difficult times. And by learning lessons, we implement change. And when we implement change, we have the ability to rise from the ashes and rise to greatness. As Joseph Campbell, the philosopher and the scholar of literature, highlights in his book, The Hero's Journey, one of the favorite books of celebrities and the rich and famous and the people who have made it in life from the material realm. He says there's always a journey that the hero goes through from ancient times to modern times and everywhere in between. That journey is going through life and then hitting a slope downwards, a difficult time. And at that moment, when you go through a difficult time, a loss of a loved one, a loss of family, a difficulty in your relationship, losing a child, losing whatever is dear to you, when you go through that, you have a choice. You can continue to go through that, and either on the other side, you go from the bottom to the very top and rise because you have nowhere to go except up, or you stay in the abyss forever. And if you take the chance and take the journey of going upwards, you may find that you will go to and soar to heights that you never thought possible. From a worldly example, you may say, what example comes to mind? Well, in the United States, roughly 100 years ago, just over 100 years ago, there was a president by the name of Theodore Roosevelt. This person is considered one of the great presidents, at least if nothing else. Some of the presidents, such as Barack Obama, has considered him his favorite, for example, his favorite president. And he's considered a trailblazer in many respects. Well, this individual, one day, we're told he was expecting his child. His wife was expecting a child. When his wife was expecting a child, and I'm reminding you this on Mother's Day in the United States of America, when he was expecting a child, his mother, his own mother, not the mother who was expecting, not his wife, but Teddy Roosevelt's own mother, came to visit in order to help with the birth and to help with looking after the child, as is required for having a new child. There are certain responsibilities and certain tasks that emerge. And so when his mother came and visited, Teddy Roosevelt received the news. He received a phone call while he's in his office that his mother is on her way, and at the same time, his wife is delivering. And not too long later, he gets a phone call, and that phone call, when he picks it up, it may be the most difficult phone call he's ever received in his life. And he's told that at that same moment that his wife is delivering, he loses not only his wife in the delivery process, he loses his mother who contracted an illness on that process of coming in on the journey. She contracted an illness on the journey towards New York to meet the family. She died and his wife died. That is, he lost two very valuable people, his wife and his mother, on the same day. This difficulty led him to go into isolation to reflect and contemplate for over a year, for 1 year's time. But when he emerged after this difficulty, imagine losing your wife, imagine losing your mother, let alone on the same day, that would be traumatic for any individual. But historians write that this experience from it, after reflecting, he was a human being, he had to go through the reflection, but he rose after that and became what society deemed a great person. This was the example Teddy Roosevelt. The example, for example, a person like Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, another president of the United States, who actually suffered from polio. He was not able to walk. He was someone who was riddled to a wheelchair. Yet he became a great individual by means of his ability to speak, by means of his vision, and whatever society said with respect to that. Am I saying these are perfect people across the board? I'm saying no. What I'm saying is that this is what society has said, that great people have gone through challenges. The same is true in Islam. If you look at the life of our beloved Holy Prophet, the Messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he went through adversity after adversity, difficulty after difficulty. First, being born as an orphan without a father and losing his mother after a very short period of time, then going and moving from the house of his grandfather to for example, the house of his uncle, moving from house to house, then also going through financial difficulty and financial hardship. And beyond that, when he goes and he propagates and he begins the message to share the message of Islam, you find an environment that he is faced with stones and being riddled with stones. He's faced with, Rasulullah is faced with the environment where people are pelting him with stones when he goes for tabligh to Ta'if. When he goes to tell people and invite people to Islam, they begin to ridicule him, they begin to berate him, they begin to pelt him with stones, to the point that when he would come back, Fatima al-Zahra salamullahi alayha would wash off and heal the wounds of Rasulullah. This is the Holy Prophet who for 13 years, imagine propagating, imagine helping, imagine speaking, imagine striving for 13 years, and yet having to face from people opposition, face from people difficulties, face from people adversity. Yet he only had, historians say, maybe 40 or whatever the numbers say. Some say more, some say less. Not more than 100 followers in 13 years. Somebody would give up. But if you look at the wave of history, every person who has achieved greatness, whether it was Islamic, whether it was spiritual, whether it was intellectual, whether it was scientific, if you look at the trajectory of their lives, there will be a portion in time where they go through difficulty and adversity. As the very famous statement that is attributed to Gandhi, where he says, whenever you want to go for a movement, whenever you want to go towards a change and a shift in society, you will have a certain number of stages that come forward. What are those stages that come forward? First, they will ignore you. When you want to change society, first people will ignore you. Understand this as a formula for success in life. So number one, they'll ignore you. They'll say, they will act as if you don't exist. The second stage is they will ridicule you. They will make fun of you. They will belittle you. They will taunt you. They will bully you. Society will bully you. This is the second stage of revolution and reformation and change in society. The third stage is after ignoring you, after humiliating you, after making fun of you, they will begin to fight you directly. They will begin to fight you head on, either through words or even more than this. Society may begin to fight you in all of the dimensions that they have. And the final scenario and the final stage of revolution and reform is that of success. You win. Every reformer went through this stage. Rasulullah was no exception. When Rasulullah first emerged, they tried to ignore Rasulullah. They tried to go away from him. They tried to divert people away from him. They ignored Rasulullah. Then, when he began to get traction, when he began to say logical things, which he was saying from the beginning, but people began to say what he's saying is making sense. When he began to draw the hearts, draw the minds, and tell people Islam is here to make your lives easier, to make your lives more fair, more just, more equitable, then people began to get attracted. So what did the chieftains of Mecca, of Quraysh do? What did the tribal leaders of Ta'if do? What did the people whose livelihoods and their way of life was being disrupted by Rasulullah's movement? They began to humiliate him. They began to ridicule him. They tried to make fun of him. They tried to make fun of him. They would call him a magician. They would call him a person who was trying to sway the people, and use all types of derogatory terms towards Rasulullah. They would call him an abtar, for example. This was the second level. The third one was where they began to fight him outright. They began to fight him through words. They began to fight him at Badr, at Uhud, and at Khandaq and Khaybar, and they began to fight him outward. And finally, at that moment of the conquest of Mecca, one may say, that when he's there and he goes from Medina back towards Mecca, when he goes back towards Mecca and he has ultimate dominion and control over the people, and they begin to say that, what are you to do with us? He forgives them all. That's true success of Rasulullah. Fatih Mecca. He says, you are the talaqa, you will go free. You are to be given amnesty. You are to be, we will not harm you, we will not hurt you, we will not, where Rasulullah calls it his greatest achievement, where he conquered Mecca without bloodshed. I tell this to the people who call out and say Rasulullah Azam, the Holy Prophet, was someone who was, God forbid, a warmonger. He was far from it. In fact, the last resort was war. In fact, the peace treaty, the pen, is where he tried to solve matters first and foremost. This is the Prophet that you and I follow. But when you look at the lives of the prophets throughout, whether it was, for example, Nuh alayhi salam, Musa alayhi salam, Isa alayhi salam, Ayyub alayhi salam, all the great prophets of Islam, they had to go through difficulty in order to achieve greatness. Not only in Islam, by the way. By the way, you will find this, for example, in Judaism, in Christianity, within that as well. Noah, Nuh alayhi salam, in Islam, he had to deal with the difficulties of, for example, his own child. Where in the ark, the water is rising, and that individual is not to be joined within. How difficult must that be for a prophet? That their own child, their own offspring is not being part of it. إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَهْلِ إِنَّهُ عَلَمٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. That he has done something that he is not from the right. He's not from the best of people necessarily, for example. These are difficulties and trials that the prophets go to. For example, we're told that Nuh alayhi salam went and did tabligh for 950 years, for example. And through this, he had to deal with the most difficult of people at times. But yet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala perhaps was grooming him, was perhaps helping him to get to a greater level in life. You know, when you look at scientific studies with respect to adversity and difficulty, this why me is a syndrome. In particular, it's actually looked at in medical psychology. What type of psychology? That psychology of patients, people who have been diagnosed with an illness, such as, for example, multiple sclerosis, MS, people who have been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, RA, people who have been diagnosed with cancer. When they have these diagnoses that have been given to them by their physicians, you notice they fall into a depression many times, where why me, the thought of why me emerges in the mind. Why did I have to go through this difficulty? Why did I have to go through this challenge? Why did I have to be hit with this calamity, as they're saying? And how you answer this question of why me and why this difficulty happened to me is called creating meaning about your diagnosis, creating meaning about your difficulty. So, for example, someone who's diagnosed with MS, RA, cancer, you name it, that person begins to think, well, why did this difficulty happen to me? And the way that you create meaning around this has a big impact on your level of depression, has a big impact on your level of quality of life. Research, for example, looked at patients in the Midwest who had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And they wanted to see that when the researchers wanted to see when they're diagnosed with this, does the impact and the way they see this difficulty hitting them in their lives, does it impact their long-term happiness 18 months later? And they found that people who were afflicted With a harder level of depression initially, they had even more depression later down the road. And people who were hit with less depression, they had less depression down the road. For example, the meaning that people created when they were diagnosed with MS, for example, was different. The way they said that this is a challenge and some people said, this is a challenge and I'll be faced with challenges in life, will be hitting me with challenges. And this is just one of many challenges. And I will take this with honor, dignity, grace. It's not easy, it's difficult. But I have control over one thing, and that is my mind. I have the control over internal events, which happen in my heart and mind, and I don't have to worry about things outside of that necessarily. But people who say that my life is over, this is the worst thing that's ever happened, this, I don't know however I will be able to overcome this, individuals in this category, they begin to do more suffering, more difficulty, more hardship in the mind. I know it's not easy. I know it's not easy to lose a loved one, to lose your father or mother. So many of our friends that we know, especially in Europe, for example, especially in, for example, Dearborn, especially across America, across Europe, and across the world. I know, and we're getting calls and messages about so many people who know someone or know someone who knows someone who has lost someone, their parents, their relatives, due to COVID-19, for example. It's not easy losing a loved one. It's not easy losing your parents. It's not easy losing a spouse. It's not easy for those people, for example, who are nurses, who are doctors, who are healthcare practitioners, who are on the front lines of these difficulties and these challenges, trying to help the world and save the world and make the world a better place. Our modern day superheroes. May Allah bless all of them and protect all of them. It's not easy. It's not easy for the family to have to deal with that. But this is what gives people the opportunity to be great, to be magnanimous, to go from the abyss, as Joseph Campbell calls it, to the great levels. The same thing with patients who went to rheumatoid arthritis. When you and I are afflicted with a difficulty, from our worldview of Islam, how do we see it? It could be, one example could be, for example, that this is a test from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another, maybe there's something that I may have done wrong in my life that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving me this, for example, so that I'm cleansed of this, so I don't have to deal with it in the hereafter. For example, some sort of punishment. Now, it's very, you have to be very careful about making these assessments. I say this because you may think that something in your life is a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for something that you already asked for forgiveness, for example, for something that you did in life, for example. I would implore you and I would invite you to not try to play the position of God, not try to play the mind of God in this position, because you may not understand and know all the variables in the equation. You and I may not know all the different dimensions of the equation. It may be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is simply testing me to raise my status. Perhaps the same way He's tested His prophets, His imams, His representatives, although their tests are higher, but still at some level, to elevate our status, it may be that Allah gives us a test to lose a loved one. How difficult it is to lose a parent, for example. Is that because I sinned? No, not necessarily at all. I want you to try to protect you from this self-blame game. Don't come forward and say that that I did this and therefore I'm getting this difficulty and challenge, because that can become a downward spiral. The better way to achieve this, the better way to solve this, the better way to deal with this in life is to actually come forward and think about the rahmah and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You ask for forgiveness, Allah inshallah will grant you forgiveness for your sin. Beyond that, if you face difficulty, if you have to go through a difficulty in life, adopt this demeanor that this is a trial and this is a test to help me raise in my level. For those people who go into military service, for example, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in Australia, or in the East, or in the West, one of the dimensions of the Army, the Navy, whatever X, Y, and Z branch, is going through training that is difficult so that one emerges on the other side a great individual. This is a natural process of life that you and I must go through some difficulty, some challenges in order to realize what our potential is. You may have so much potential in your life that you don't even recognize, and it doesn't emerge because you are not challenged and you are not tested. The coal that is pushed against pressure, against heat, that coal that is dark, that coal that is seemingly insignificant, when it is brushed with pressure, with difficulty, with heat over time, that very coal becomes a diamond. That very carbon becomes a diamond. But it is that difficulty and adversity that makes it such and makes it so. The same way you and I are being given these challenges. We have in traditions from the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, whenever an individual is given difficulty, whenever an individual is faced with adversity and they are given a challenge, they have an option. Either do sabr, either do have patience, or, for example, wail and bemoan the situation. Now, no one can blame you if you're having a difficult time and you are wailing and bemoaning, or maybe even complaining to Allah for this. But the tradition says from the Ahlul Bayt, if you have a bala, if you have a challenge, if you have a difficulty in your life, and you are patient, sabr in the bala, that you have patience in this adversity, in this difficulty, there is another adversity, there is another difficulty that's going to come after this. And Allah knows that it's going to come after this in your life. If you have patience with the first difficulty, Allah will protect you from the second one. He will avert the second one. He will remove the second one from your life. Because He will say that you had sabr, you had patience in the first stage of the difficulty, therefore I will prevent the next one to come towards you and harm you and cause you more challenges in life. But if difficulties were something to bring someone down, if difficulties were something that were only for someone who sinned, would the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam go through difficulties? They are free from sin by choice. Therefore, it is very clear that the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, Rasulullah A'zam, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Fatimah al-Zahra salamullahi alayha, Imam Hassan, Imam Hussein, and the line and their lineage, for example, if it was the case that someone who goes through difficulty is not a good person, God forbid, if someone who goes through difficulty is not a great person, why would they go through this difficulty? You look at the life of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, for example. You think his life was easy? Financial difficulty, for example, growing up at times when Rasulullah came forward and there was a conversation about marrying Fatimah al-Zahra, where Ali ibn Abi Talib came forward to marry Fatimah al-Zahra. Rasulullah said, Ya Ali, what do you own? What do you possess? You know, the people who are trying to marry Fatimah al-Zahra, they owned everything in worldly standards. They had property, they had houses, they had horses, for example, which were the cars of the day. They had everything you could think of. But it was none of that that Rasulullah found to be valuable. Amir al-Mu'mineen was asked, and Ali ibn Abi Talib salawatullah salamu alayhi is reported to have said, Ya Rasulullah, you know, I don't have much in the way of material gains. I have, for example, my sword, I have my shield, for example, I have a horse, and I have, for example, a ring in some traditions. At that point in time, when he's told this, Rasulullah says, for example, he says that with respect to the sword, Islam needs this. You have served Islam and will serve Islam with this. And for example, he goes through the list. He says the shield is something that you don't need. Your opposition, your enemy needs this shield. It's better for them to have it. Therefore, sell it, get some income, and marry Fatimah al-Zahra. Amir al-Mu'mineen was not the wealthiest person in the world at that stage in his marriage. But later on in life, he became very wealthy in the 25-year period of time. Why? Because he was developing property. He was developing land. He had established orchards. He had, for example, opened oases in the desert. He had also, for example, opened rivers and streams. And he worked very hard. But after that, in that period of time, after Rasulullah, Amir al-Mu'mineen had to go through the taunting, the ridicule of people as well. When Rasulullah passed away, they began to say that he's too young to be the ruler, for example. Rasulullah didn't think he was too young. For example, after Rasulullah, they began to say, you know, one of the objections they came forward with Ali ibn Abi Talib, they said, why he can't be the Khalifa, why he can't rule over the Muslims? He said he smiles too much. He has too much of a pleasant demeanor. Yani, what do you mean? As in, the person who rules should have always be upset, always be stern, always have a frown on their face? Ali ibn Abi Talib knew better what Rasulullah had said. He said the person should smile in life. A smile is a form of charity. This was the reality of the matter. And on top of that, they began to smear. There was a propaganda campaign, a smear campaign against Amir al-Mu'mineen, to the point that the people of Sham, Muawiyah and his henchmen, began to spread propaganda about Ali ibn Abi Talib. They began to say first things about his physical appearance. They began to say, for example, his appearance, they would say, and I don't even want to recall some of these, but they would, for example, say that he was overweight, he was balding. They would try to make fun of his appearance, although this was not true, number one. And number two, on top of that, Ali ibn Abi Talib, we respect and have virtue and reverence for him because of his traits and his attributes, not of physical appearance, although those were not true. It was, how is it that the person who used to eat some salt, a few grains of salt, a little bit of dry bread, and occasionally some diluted yogurt could have, for example, be of this way? We're not here to, for example, make fun of anyone's appearance in any way, but this was the tactics of Muawiyah and his likes, and we need to expose them. And this was one level. But the other level that was even more difficult and more challenging of what Muawiyah was trying to do was, he began to say that Ali ibn Abi Talib was not a good Muslim. He was not someone who prayed. He was someone who was outside of the fold of Islam. Hasha lillah, na'udhu billah min dhalik. That this is absolutely ridiculous. To the point that when he was martyred, when he was assassinated, Ali ibn Abi Talib, the people of Levant began to ask how. How was he killed? How was he martyred? How did he die? They said he died in a state of prayer. When they heard this, that he died in a state of prayer, they were shocked that Ali ibn Abi Talib used to pray. That Ali ibn Abi Talib had to see the witnessing of his wife being murdered. He had to witness and see his wife going through difficulty at the hands of the enemies of Allah. That Ali ibn Abi Talib had to have a rope tied around his neck throughout and go throughout the city. That Ali ibn Abi Talib, does that mean that Ali ibn Abi Talib's level was lower? No, this was all elevating the status of Ali ibn Abi Talib. You and I, when we go through difficulties, think the same way, analyze the same way, that every great person in the history of humanity and the society, and the prophets and the imams, not being an exception, they as well went through this. Your level and your status is being elevated, and you may not even realize it. You may not even know it. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, what is there left to say? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's entire being is sacrificed so that he is exalted and at the height in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his representatives. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, going after Karbala, towards Kufa, towards Sham, towards the dungeons, towards the prisons, he saw the opportunity and he saw the silver lining in these difficulties. He said that I was able to pray, I was able to worship, I was able to develop a relationship with my Lord. The same when you go to Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam. He's spending his life, much of his life, in and out of prison. Anyone who's going through this difficulty would say, why Allah, I'm innocent. You know I'm innocent. Why am I in this state, in this situation? Look at the perspective of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. He says, my Lord, I thank you for the ability to be able to worship and pray to you. I was in a situation where when I was free, I would long for the ability to worship you. As an example, I'm paraphrasing, using my own words. But there's the requirements of life that would get in my way, meaning getting in our way. But now I have none of those to worry about, and all I have is you and myself, and I have the ability to worship towards you. And the Imam made the most of that time, inspiring people to worship. The same with Imam al-Rida alayhi salam. He is taken away from his homeland, the land that he loves, and he's having to go to Tus. He's having to go to a very far distance. But it is in this that he understands the mission and the divine wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you can go through the different Imams in their lives. You and I will go through difficulties, we'll go through challenges, we'll go through adversity. But when you go through difficulty, when you go through adversity, stop and pause and reflect that every great person in society, every great person in humanity, in fact, one may argue that the more you go through difficulty, the more you go through adversity, the more challenges you go through, you may not see it, you may not know it at that point in time, but it may very well be that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing you to be one of the great people throughout history, throughout civilization, throughout society. But the choice is yours, the decision is yours, the ability is yours to be able to rise from the ashes or decide to fold under those circumstances. I invite you to implement in your lives the greatness and achieve your greatness and understand that potential that lies dormant within you. And that potential that lies dormant within you is recognized by weathering and facing the difficulty with sabr, with honor, with dignity, with grace, and with perseverance, the same way Rasulullah did, the same way Amir al-Mu'mineen did, the same way Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam did. And all of this is achieved by having absolute trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in His mission and His message. And that is what is able to get you and I through the difficult times. And it will continue to. The ultimate journey and the ultimate destination on the journey of this is spirituality. When you go through difficulty and are patient through it, you will achieve the kernel of spirituality. And that lies in absolute trust and deep love of the Almighty, the Divine, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah indeed takes care of His servants. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to have patience in our lives, to have resolve in our lives, to have the ability to have strength and perseverance in the difficult times, so that we can implement it and learn from the line of Rasulullah, of Amir al-Mumin, of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to also enable us to be great people. We ask Allah to bless our loved ones. We ask Allah to protect our loved ones, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of the Imam of our time, Imam Sahib al-Asr wa Zaman. Wa akhiru da'wana anil hamdu lillahi rabbil alamin.